song Hey Jealousy and the dry climates of Los Angeles and Beijing.
The world of Gladstone's two novels, The Craft Sequence, is inspired by the financial crisis of 2008. He has said Chapter 11 bankruptcy, with its cutting up and rewiring of dead or almost dead stuff, looks a lot like necromancy. That's one example of how magic stands in for the economy in his books.
Okay, so there's a deposit in your account of Gladstone knowledge. Let's bolster it with some more insight on Max Gladstone in Aaron's whiteboard.
One of the most common bits of advice given to aspiring writers is, write what you know. You know what? That's terrible advice. If we were limited to writing what we know, we would never read anything speculative, progressive, fantastic, or unlike the humdrum of day-to-day existence. Thankfully, most actual authors recognize this trite phrase for what it is. Heck, even Aristotle, chief advocate of mimesis and champion of the theatrical verities, still recognized good literature was about more than the mundane. Instead, follow the advice of author Max Gladstone. When you're gonna write, aim big. It's clearly a sentiment he had in mind while embarking on his Craft sequence of novels. It's a series built around necromantic lawyers collecting for dead gods. Not the work of someone interested in a slice-of-life novel about the daily commute. Now, you could argue that Gladstone is drawing on his own academic and professional experience in infrastructure and information systems research. After all, a religion is, amongst other things, a massive piece of infrastructure. But it's not just the major plot points, but the nitty-gritty of Gladstone's work which pegs him as a first-order fabulist. Steampunk aesthetics and a strong woman of color protagonist underscore the degree to which he has invested not merely in representing the world he personally experiences, but crafting worlds which could be. Also, he looks like he could play Doctor Who. When I pointed this out to my wife, she said, "Which doctor?" And so I said, "Not a witch doctor, Doctor Who." I crack me up.
Witch doctor.
Witch doctor.
I find that funny.
That's a joke you
Of
would
course
make.
I find that
Of
funny.
course you find that funny.
I think 14th Doctor, yeah?
Yeah?
After Capaldi?
Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
Well, you know what? All this means nothing if Max Gladstone doesn't exist, but thankfully he does, and he's here with us now.
Yes, thank you, Max, for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me also.
So let's dive right into the Craft sequence. Tell us what it's about.
It's about basically the big business of necromancy. Back in 2008, I came back from spending a little while in China when the economy started falling apart. And I had this weird feeling like I was in the middle of this kind of spiritual war, the kind of thing that happens in fantasy novels, you know? I would look around and I'd hear that there were these enormous entities that were sort of being destroyed or destroying themselves, and at the same time there was nothing kind of there was no physical damage that was happening. So I thought, wow, you know, you have basically these enormous immortal entities that are going into battle and falling apart, and then we have other people who are coming in to sort of stitch them back together on the operating table and tell Igor to get cranking, and then they start sort of wandering around, chomping on brains and things like that. So, yes.
We were talking about other examples of where magic and economics have crossed. And I think
it has in the past.
Lev Grossman, The Magicians, was one where we could think of. But there haven't been that many of them. Why do you think that is, that nobody made that connection?
I'm kind of as surprised as anyone else, because it seems like a really logical jump to me. Magic is a form of power that is abstract, that like the more you spend an awful lot of time and sort of spiritual energy generating it, it's often seen as corrupting, it's often seen as sort of forming the people who give their all in the pursuit of it into sort of strange beings. And I don't know, this is a lot of the same way that like a lot of popular culture views money, views economics, views pursuits like the law. You can get sucked into it, walk down a dark path. So, you know, if you take The Wolf of Wall Street and then you turn everybody into an immortal Lich King, this is basically what you end up with.
For me, the parallel is more like I understand about as much about economics as I do about magic. So for me, it might as well be magic.
Yeah, I think a lot of
point.
people feel
Yeah,
that way.
for me, math is hard. I'm like that math Barbie. I'm like, math is hard. I don't get it. I have to use like various complicated applications to figure out tips and stuff. But anyway, I digress. I actually have kind of a non sequitur question, and I was on your website.
I was going to go into the Werewolf of Wall Street, but we can get to that.
Oh, that's good.
All right,
That's
excellent.
good.
See, it just sort of writes itself.
Yeah,
All right.
exactly.
I like that. So we poked a little fun about Doctor Who earlier in the show, but I also noticed on your blog that you haven't written about it in maybe like 3-4 years or so, but you did mention Sherlock and the new BBC Sherlock series. I was wondering if you've been keeping up with the show, and if so, like, have your feelings changed about it? Have you become a fan? And what you like about it, if you do.
The BBC Sherlock series,
Yeah.
or Doctor Who, or
BBC Sherlock.
I am bad Sherlock fan in that I haven't yet watched the new episodes, even though they've been out in the UK for the
right.
last couple weeks. I've been loving Sherlock, actually. I think it has remained a exciting kind of fresh take on the characters. I really, really like Martin Freeman as Watson. And Benedict Cumberbatch, of course, is great as Sherlock, but Sherlock is this wonderful sort of larger-than-life character who most of the interpretations that I've seen get something about Sherlock right. What people miss all the time is Watson. You have sort of Watson as this, like, sort of doddering fool who's following around Sherlock and kind of pratfalling every few minutes so that the adapters can get a laugh in. Whereas he's a military man, he's a ladies' man, he's this, like, cunning, cool angle on the entire Sherlock mythos. He just looks like he's not the smartest knife in the bag because, you know, Sherlock is going over here sort of laser destroying any enigma that he's coming into
Right.
contact with. So I love Martin Freeman's portrayal of Watson in the new Sherlock series, and I'm really excited to see the next season.
I love the show, and but you know, I have to say that my favorite Watson, my favorite modern day Watson, is actually Lucy Liu on Elementary, which is a show I didn't think I would like, and then I started watching it, and I was like, this is actually pretty close, like one of the closer interpretations to canon that I can find, like in terms of the original Arthur Conan Doyle stuff, and so I've been really enjoying that show.
Excellent. I'll need to catch up on it. I really liked Lucy Liu in the Lucky Number Slevin of all this silly things. She's playing a kind of Watson-ish character in that, right? Like
right.
the person who's always a step or two ahead or sort of following behind the mystery, but is like almost too smart for their own good.
Well, we got some listener questions from our Goodreads forum to ask you. And the first one comes from Charles, who writes, "My question. You write a lot about gods. How do you, Max Gladstone, define what a god is?"
Just a small question, just, you know, itty bitty.
I think he means in your writing, of course, just to narrow it down a little bit.
God is the thing of which, if someone asks you if you are one, you say yes,
Yes,
right?
good. Yes, exactly.
In these books, gods are a sort of network effect of human communities. You get a lot of people together and they start sort of communicating with one another and believing in their existence as a community. And that sort of network, that like spiritual network, starts to display signs of consciousness, starts to talk back eventually, and starts to communicate with other sort of emergent properties of other networks. And that's kind of what the spiritual dimension of these books comes from. There's, if you think about like human consciousness, right? You can compare human consciousness as an emergent phenomenon of our biology, if you're thinking about it in this very biological reductionist way, right? So you have electrical signals and chemical interactions in our brain, each one of which is pretty easy to describe, but you put millions of them together, constantly firing at, you know, like supernovas moving through our neural pathways all at once. And consciousness happens. You get things that sort of think and breathe and dream. And I started wondering, what if the same thing would happen with sort of social networks, with the kind of webs of engagement and interaction that economists talk about cities and talk about civilizations as being? Wouldn't those sorts of things kind of wake up? And then what would happen when they started to talk with the people who were part of them, like communicating with your own cells?
We're just the cells. We're the neurons
Yeah.
in the larger consciousness. That's fascinating.
I got a little shell-shocked there.
Yeah,
for a
you were
second.
imagining
I was
Google
like,
becoming a god?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a consideration, right?
Right.
Right.
The science fiction sort of community has taken these ideas in a lot of directions, talking about sort of technological networks waking up. Like the internet wakes up and starts talking with people. It's some part of the plot of Neuromancer, for example.
Right.
But there are all sorts of other networks that aren't explicitly technological, but might still, in some way, have behavior, have personalities. We think about cities as having personalities, even though they're just, if you want to reduce it down to a certain level, a bunch of concrete and roads and buildings and stuff, none of which need to be in the place where they are. And yet, Los Angeles feels like Los Angeles, Boston feels like Boston. It's not just the climate, it's sort of everything that combines to make an entity that's as much of a person as any of us are. maybe.
No, that's a really cool way of thinking about it, actually.
And people tend to identify you by the place you're from, as if you share that
As you somehow have
personality.
absorbed that sense
too,
of
yeah.
the
Right.
place, or that's a really good way to put it. So this is kind of a long question, but bear with us. Andy says, Max, in your Twitter profile, you say you're an occasional martial artist. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, why occasional, what your martial arts background training is, what styles you have studied, and how, if at all, that background influences your writing?
I'm a very nice martial artist, but only occasionally. I started doing martial arts, back when I was in grade school, and I moved around a lot when I was a kid. So there wasn't much of that time that a lot of martial arts styles really want you to put into, like, you've done 10 years in the style and now you're the Grand Master. So I'd be doing a particular branch of karate in Ohio. We moved down to Tennessee. I started another branch of karate. Then I was like going off to college and so just kind of jumping from substyle to substyle to substyle. And there are different ways that certain martial arts styles make you think and make you feel. For me anyway, like Shotokan karate, which is sort of very straight punches, kicks, blocks. It's what Ryu does in Street Fighter.
Okay.
Except for no fireballs.
I was gonna say no.
Yeah, no Hadoukens.
Hadouken!
Maybe I just didn't get to that level.
Yeah, that's probably it.
But that feels like very sort of logical, step by step. I'm now going to do this block, and now I'm going to punch you back. And whereas styles like Tai Chi, which I started doing later, and Aikido are a lot more about melding with other people's energies and redirecting them in particular ways. And then there's fencing, which I've been doing a lot of very recently, and is really weird. It's like playing time travel chess with the other person. Only you both have swords, so maybe it's like sword plus chess plus
Where does the
travel.
time travel come in?
When you get beyond the point where you're just extending your arm and putting the pointy end into the other guy, the other guy you start thinking about, like, okay, if I have these 3 feet of steel, 3.5 feet of steel or so. That means that there's a lot of space on which the other person can interact with my attack. If I'm just punching them, then there's maybe a foot more or less that they have to like see what my hand is doing and try to block it or interact with it. So if I'm extending my sword, then all of a sudden there's like 4 feet or so if you count the arm and you count the actual blade. So there's a lot of space in there to play around, to like encourage someone to extend in a particular direction. When they're overcommitted in that direction, then you can either block or you can make an opposition, sort of redirecting them along another line and then taking it in. But then if they know that you know that, they'll be looking for you to try to do that to them. So they will start something that makes you respond in a certain way that then they can respond to in another way, which you weren't expecting. And then the higher you get, the deeper you get into the sport, you start jumping further and further and further ahead in time.
I had
And
no
it's
idea
all
it was
happening like
that.
split seconds too.
Yeah.
That's because I took a little bit of fencing, and the thing I could never do is like, weyt, but I'm still thinking about my move. You've already stabbed me. Stop.
Help! Yeah, no, there's this thing called the tactical wheel, where it starts off with you're doing a direct attack, and then you're parrying the direct attack, and then it goes all the way around. There are a ton of steps and sub-steps, and then you get back to just direct attack again, or the solution to all of this incredibly complicated, over the top,
So can you just skip all that thinking? Can you just skip that part and just stabby? Just be the stabby?
Just stabby gets you pretty far in the early stages of the sport, and then other people start taking advantage.
And they start
of
with
the
the
fact that
just
they know you're
blocky
going to
and then
stab you.
stabby you.
And what kind of fencing do you do? I know there's like foil, and what are the other? Epee.
I do epee. Certainly the easiest weapon to deal with from a technological perspective, not the technique, not the actual practice of it, but for epee, you can hit anywhere on the other person's body. You can move as fast as you want to, as slow as you want to, so long as you just make it, so as long as you touch the other person with the tip of your weapon.
Stabby.
We brought some
Yeah,
actual
exactly.
sword into the sword and laser finally.
I
Thank
know,
you
it's
for
about
that.
time.
Excellent.
Actually, yeah. Captain has a question. He knows you've made a choose-your-own-adventure set in your setting, but if a AAA game developer approached you to create a game in your setting, what would your dream game be like?
These books are about there's a lot of procedural and investigation elements, so an adventure game would probably be the best fit. That's one of the reasons that I liked so much doing the choose your own adventure game, Choice of the Deathless, getting to sort of allow a player to walk through that kind of interactive experience. But some sort of more open adventure gamey kind of thing would be amazing to do. I'm thinking about the old LucasArts adventure games and like sort of Double Fine's adventure games that they're doing these days. That would be a lot of fun.
That would be a lot of fun. So Captain also asks, so craft is a free market capitalism